I'm Jane Davenport, and if you've ever wished your pencil lines could melt like dreams into watercolour, I have found the magic combo. It's a match made in mermaid heaven, my WaterWand coloured pencils and this glorious flip paper. I discovered just how beautiful this pairing is during one of my mermaid weekend retreats, and today I'm showing you how it works and why it might just change your art forever. Now, if you don't like drawing mermaids, that's fine. I adore drawing mermaids, so that's how I'm using them. But of course, you could use watercolour pencils to draw whatever you want. WaterWands are aquarelles or watercolour pencils, so you can use whatever brand you have. But of course, the Jane Davenport WaterWands are beautifully pigmented, have gorgeous colours and are lovely and soft to use just as a regular pencil, and have a beautiful release of colour when you add water or other mediums, as I will show you later in this video. But what really unlocks the secrets of WaterWands or watercolour pencils is the right kind of paper. The paper that I absolutely love is in my flip pad and also our flip journal. One side of the paper is smooth, the other side of the paper has just enough texture to grab pigment, catch it, but not so much that it actually eats your pencils. And the result is you get shading and blending that feels painterly. Colours can be lifted off and your lines stay expressive, and the feeling that you have as you're creating stays intuitive. And how can I make such bold claims? Well, this is what I live, and I've taught hundreds, thousands of people, and I've used the watercolour pencils in a lot of my in-person workshops, and so I see the magic of them in combination with really fantastic paper. So you can see how I'm laying my pencil a little bit parallel to the surface of the paper, and I'm letting the textured side of the flip paper, which is not a fancy or expensive watercolor paper. I actually don't like 100% cotton or very expensive handmade papers for watercolor pencils. I just think they perform better on a paper that likes a little bit of mixed media, which is this paper. Now, I'm a paper aficionado. I'm an absolute freak when it comes to paper, and I adore testing different papers, and this is just, well, you can see how the watercolor pencil releases its color. But the lovely thing about using watercolor pencils is you don't have to completely eradicate your lines. I think it looks absolutely charming and beautiful to be able to see the hand of the artist as you're going, and to allow some of those little marks to stay. So I don't want full release all the time. Sometimes I might. If you want the colors to release fully, then layer up more of that watercolor, but very, very lightly. You're better off going in light layers than going in heavy in a single layer, because it's harder to get the pigment to move and wash along like a watercolor with you. Another really favorite way of using watercolor pencils is on top of dry watercolor. Because these are watercolor in a stick form, in a pencil, they have a way of being able to talk to watercolor just so fluently. They speak the same language. So it's easy to add pencil over the top, and then you can just add with not a really wet brush, just a damp brush, and you can add that water onto it so that it releases into its watercolor form, and you can form lots of lovely glazes. Water wands are really the daydreamers of the pencil world. They sketch like a dream. You can create soft, fluffy clouds with them, and they feel fabulous in the hand because you do have that control that their form gives you. And then when you add the water or other mediums, as I will show you, as I said, they melt just enough while keeping their soul. Now you can create new colours by layering different colours. So here I'm laying pinks and blues, and of course when I add water I'm going to get various purples. And what I'm drawing on is a watercolour sketch that's already existing here. So some of that might wake up when I add a little bit of water as well. So if you have a very wet brush, you're going to wake up what's underneath. And depending on the pigment and just the forces of nature, how much of that might move. Sometimes not much moves at all because, like I said, the watercolour pencils talk and let the watercolour underneath know that they're in expert hands and they've just got another little troop to support them on the way, and that is what they are. They are an amazing support for watercolour. I like to add contrasting colours to what lays underneath. Could be other layers of water wands, of the watercolour pencils, but I like to add subtleties to the watercolour and just enhance watercolour's natural abilities. And now watch as I blend this blue line with water. You can see how it doesn't disappear, it joins the painting. And I love taking a little bit of those stronger sorts of colours and adding them into my shadows here and there. And you can see that I can lift the paint right from the pencil tip and get a nice subtle variation. What's gorgeous about these as well, and watercolour in general, is if you put a little bit of a colour down and it doesn't do quite what you wanted it to do, it doesn't accentuate the way that you wanted it to do that, just take your brush again, wash it off, get it clean, control the water that's on it, and then just take that last little bit of watercolour off. Also try drawing straight into wet paint, wet watercolour. You'll get a crayon-like effect. You can scratch into this even with your fingernails or into it with other pencil colours or add more water to really get some texture and variety into your image. Looking after your water wands is really easy. I find it's better if you twirl your pencil sharpener around the pencil, and these are not going to be able to hold a super fine point. They're too pigmented, they're too soft. I really do not like super hard pencils, and they just scratch the surface of the paper and they don't lay down the pigment the way that I want them to. But the trade-off is you're not going to get a super fine point, which in a watercolour pencil we don't really want anyway. You can add super fine details with other instruments. We don't want to be scratching into the paper. We want soft, lay down, magical strokes. And don't forget that you don't have to add any water at all. You can just leave these as an almost pastel-like soft pencil. And not only do you not have to add water, you can also add other mediums to your watercolor pencils to get different effects. Let's use some of my collage medium. This is a super clear matte medium. It dries very, very clear and very, very matte. It's fantastic for collage, hence the name. but you can use it in all sorts of other ways, just like every other matte medium. You can use matte medium as a glue, as a varnish, and also as a convectant for watercolor. So I'm using a different type of brush. I'm not using one of my beautiful soft watercolor brushes. For a start, any acrylic or acrylic medium is tough on your brushes, and a beautiful watercolor brush will last you your whole artist life if you look after it. Your acrylic brushes will never last quite so long. So keep your watercolors brushes for watercolor and your watercolor pencils on water medium, and switch over to a brush made for acrylic. Acrylic also likes to be bossed around a little bit more, and a bit of a stiffer brush doesn't hurt it. Now let's stick with acrylic mediums for just a moment. I'm going to use one of my absolute favourite art supplies. This is the Brush with Fame paint pen. So it contains a lovely white acrylic ink. So I've added some of my WaterWand colour there, and then when I go over it, I'm activating it with the ink that is inside the pen, and it's giving it a little bit of opacity, but with a lot of control, and I'm not adding water. I've got acrylic medium, so things aren't going to get too wishy-washy. Of course, I might lift up whatever else is underneath the watercolor because, you know, this is a physical process. I'm using the nib to actually blend the ink and the watercolor pencil together, but you get a really, really nice effect, and I can get very sharp outlines that I can't necessarily get with other mediums. So this is something to try. And the Brush with Fame paint pens, like I said, I just think they are the ultimate paint pen. But as with all paint pens, if you've used them to do something like this, where you've contaminated the nib on purpose, just make sure that you clean them off. And I like to clean them off by creating more artwork, just little patterns, just little dots, until the nib is clean, and then I put it to bed clean, so that when I go to use it again and I go to do a nice little highlight in an eye, it's actually white, not white with a bit of red, pink or purple in it. WaterWands aren't just a pencil, as you have come to realise, I'm hoping, but they're a bridge between drawing and painting. They're a little quiet revolution just sitting there on your art desk. So I'm going to use them to sketch out very, very loosely a mermaid, of course. And they're so lovely to draw with. And you know that you can erase them when you add water. So it's sort of like a very colourful graphite pencil, but you're not going to use an eraser, you're going to use water. So that's what I'm doing, just to tidy up some of those lines. And because I've got water on the paper, I can show you another little trick with them. Just draw straight into the wet paper. You'll get a crayon-like line where the pigment is released in its full form. So here it is dry, much softer on the side of the page there, and then as soon as you get that water added to it, it goes very, very dark, and they all do this, and you get this nice little crayon-y effect. You do have to sometimes be a little bit careful doing this if you're working on a very low quality or a thinner paper, because water plus paper and a little bit of abrasion or manipulation equals paper mache. Just always keep that in mind. And I always feel very free when I'm using an art supply like this that is intuitive and holds lots of surprises for me. I feel very experimental and quite wild and free with my drawing lines. So let's do something a little bit more experimental and add some acrylic medium. Now, usually with acrylics, you give them a shake before you open them. Don't shake them when you have the lid open. We've all learnt that from experience. And again, I'm using an acrylic brush because it's a little bit firmer. This is one from one of my very first acrylic paint sets. This is a little OG. She's still going strong. but I do look after my brushes, I must say. But I'm working the gesso. This is Joyful Gesso in the opaque white. You could do it with any colour. White's going to be good, and gesso especially good because it's so matte when it dries, which allows you to work with lots of other things over the top of it. So I'm going to let that dry, add a little bit more colour down in a contrasting colour on the body, keeping a little bit of that pink mixture that I've got in my brush and using that to activate the WaterWand and create a little bit more excitement for the tail area of my mermaid, who for some reason is in a box. As I was going through this book to show you some different techniques, there were just existing artworks in it and swatches and so forth. This is one of my favorite things about journaling, art journaling, swatching, just having areas to play in that I've already not so much pre-prepared, because they're not very intentional, and prepared sounds intentional, doesn't it? I'm just playing with colours, or I've been painting something else and I've got paint on my brush and I just pop it in on some blank paper in one of my flip journals or in a flip pad, and then it's there waiting for me like a lovely bright friend to create something completely new on top of. And in that wild and free spirit, why not draw into the wet acrylic paint? And a lot of detail tools don't like going into wet acrylic paint, it ruins them, but not your WaterWands, so enjoy it. Let's also add some white gouache. This is the Go-Go gouache from my collection. It's really creamy and gorgeous. So I'm adding a little bit of the WaterWand around the edges of that rectangle and then just massaging in with a watercolor brush, or I could use an acrylic brush, but it's gouache, watercolor brush is fine, just to get a little bit of a shadowed vignetting border happening. And with the gouache still on my brush, I'm going to add a little bit of watercolor and get another little cloudy effect, and then finish off with some paint pen to add a little bit of detail, more watercolor pencil if I want, and a little bit more gouache, so that I've got a nice, beautiful, soft, dreamy mermaid swimming in a neon sea. So watercolor pencils, the WaterWands, on this paper, which allows you to create in all sorts of different ways, are just a magical combination that I had to share with you. You've got the textured side and you've got the smooth side to play with. And they work really quite beautifully with LayerCake as well. And if you don't know what LayerCake is, if that sounds like a code word, you need to go to my website at jdavenport.com and discover an incredible art supply. It's kind of like what gouache wishes it was when it grows up, you know? I'll pop all the links for the art supplies that I've used in the description, and if you do try them, tag me in your art. I'd love to see what you create. And if you're new here, welcome to my joyfully unpolished art world. Each week I also do love streams, which are my version of a live stream, and you're very welcome to come along. It's best if you join the mailing list that is on my website, because that is where I let you know where I'm going live. I try and keep it regular now. Whether you're new here or a fabulous seasoned subscriber or even a Davenpeep, hit the bell so that you don't miss on any other art adventures. I hope you get out your watercolor pencils, even better if they're WaterWands, and some of that gorgeous flip paper, and have some fun. Really push the boundaries of what your art supplies can do. That's what I love doing. Ooh. Also, I am freezing. I am going to have to go and put on a jumper because somehow I got stuck down here without one. Bye.